Christopher Columbus is famous for discovering the Americas. Or is he? Well, it's complicated. So let's start at the beginning. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer, set sail from Spain with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa. And while today we know he landed in the Americas, back then he didn't know that either. See, he wasn't actually trying to discover new lands. He was looking for a faster route to Asia. At the time, Europe was obsessed with getting to Asia, and especially China, because they had invented gunpowder, and we all know how Europeans love their guns. But the only way to get there was a long, slow trek over land through Italy or Portugal, or you could take the longest sea route around Africa. Columbus wanted to find a quicker way, so he proposed sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. Most people thought he was crazy. They didn't think it was possible to travel that far out into the ocean without hitting land. But Columbus was convinced the Earth was round, and he had calculated that if he sailed far enough west, he would eventually hit the other side of the globe and find a quicker route to Asia. So Columbus approached the Spanish rulers, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, with his proposal. Now, they were hoping to make money off this voyage, so they weren't super interested in sailing out into the middle of nowhere. But Columbus promised that he would bring them gold and riches if they funded his trip. Plus, he said that if he didn't find a faster route to Asia, he would turn right around and come back. So they agreed to pay for his journey. And on August 3, 1492, Columbus and his crew departed from a port in Spain with 3 ships, the Nina and the Pinta, which were small, fast ships used for trading, and the Santa Maria, which was bigger and would be the flagship of the voyage. Now, these guys were sailors, not scientists, so they didn't have GPS or any way to calculate their exact location. Instead, they estimated their position based on things like the stars and the currents, and they used dead reckoning to figure out how far they'd traveled. This meant that they sometimes had no idea how far away from land they really were. For example, one sailor on the ship later wrote that he once thought they were 200 miles from land when really they were 600 miles away. So you can imagine that being out in the middle of the ocean without knowing where you are can make a person a little bit anxious. And as the days turned into weeks, the food started to run low and tempers started to flare. But Columbus kept the crew's spirits up by telling them that land was just around the corner, even though he didn't really know that himself. In fact, he kept 2 sets of logs, one with the real distance traveled and one with a shorter estimate to calm the crew down. Finally, on October 11th, after more than 2 months at sea, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana spotted land. According to legend, he shouted land, land, but really he probably shouted tierra, which is Spanish for land. Either way, the next morning, on October 12th, Columbus and his men landed on an island and he became famous as the first European to reach the Americas in more than 1,000 years. Now it turns out that Vikings had established a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada around 500 years before Columbus arrived, but Europeans had long forgotten about it. So for all intents and purposes, Columbus was the first European to stumble upon the Americas since the Roman Empire was busy crumbling. And while you might think that he landed in North America, actually he first stepped foot on an island in what is now the Bahamas. He called it San Salvador, meaning Holy Savior, and he thought he was in India, so he called the native people Indians. He explored the island in parts of what are now Cuba and Hispaniola. He was super impressed by the natural beauty of the islands, and he was also impressed by the gold worn by some of the local people. So he claimed the land for Spain and started planning his next voyage. And that's why, when he got back to Spain and told everyone he'd discovered a new route to Asia, no one really believed him. You see, back then, maps of the world didn't have the Americas on them, and most people thought it was impossible to travel that far out into the ocean and not get lost forever. Plus, when Columbus described the plants and animals he'd seen in the Americas, people thought he must have been in India. Not to mention that Columbus was a terrible writer and his descriptions were full of mistakes. But eventually, as more explorers traveled to the Americas and brought back their own stories and samples of plants and animals, people finally started to believe Columbus's story. But while Columbus Day celebrates his arrival in the Americas, for the people who lived here first, it's a day of mourning, you see. Within a few years of Columbus's arrival, European explorers and conquerors began showing up in the Americas regularly, and in 1519 Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador, led an expedition that conquered the Aztec Empire. When Cortés and his men arrived in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, they were greeted as gods by the Aztecs. Cortés was even offered a noble title and told that he and his men would live in luxury. But once the conquistadors were settled in their fancy new homes, Cortés turned on them and began pillaging the city. His men killed thousands of Aztec men, women and children, stole their gold and silver treasures and destroyed their temples and palaces. And within a few years, the mighty Aztec Empire was gone. And while Cortés and his men were responsible for the deaths of millions of Native Americans, Columbus is often considered to be the one who started it all. That's because after he returned to Spain and told his tale of adventure and riches, he inspired a wave of exploration and colonization in the Americas. Within a few decades, Spain and Portugal had established colonies throughout the Caribbean and South America, and the French, English, and Dutch followed soon after. And as more and more Europeans came to the Americas, they brought with them diseases that devastated Native American populations who'd never even seen a Spaniard. Smallpox, measles, and influenza killed millions of Native Americans, and their populations were further decimated by warfare and slavery. Still, Columbus's journey was a remarkable feat of navigation, and his discovery of the Americas changed the world forever. It connected Europe and the Americas and kicked off centuries of trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. And while his legacy is complicated and his actions had a devastating impact on Native Americans, there's no denying that he was an important figure in history. You've reached a fever pitch. Okay, class dismissed. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to help keep this channel running, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. As a token of our love and appreciation, we've got some pretty cool treats to share, like blooper reels, deleted scenes, and even some work-in-progress stuff. So head over to our crowdfunding platform and join today.